they want to.
Yes, and welcome to Let Them Talk, and we have a very interesting show tonight. My guest, Mike Roselle. Thanks for joining us, Mike, on very short notice.
Nice
you're here
Peter.
Up from West Virginia,
Yes,
right, and where you're fighting mountaintop removal.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Roselle is quite a famous person in the activist community. He's a leading activist and founder, one of the founders of Earth First, an activist organization dedicated to defending the earth. Obviously, Earth First, right? And as that organization, which was founded many years ago in the idea of monkey wrenching, and which has come now to be a more mature activist organization operating on many levels, and we'll ask you about those levels and how Earth First operates, or the organizations that came out of it, I would say, because you're not really in Earth First anymore.
Once an Earth Firster, you're always an Earth Firster.
Right, I would think so. All right, so let's start, Mike. I want to talk about you and your background a little later, because I want to start with the trial you were at today, because what brought you here was the trial of Reverend Billy.
Yes, yes.
And Reverend Billy, some listeners might know, some viewers might know, is he's a figure, you know. I don't know what to describe him. He's an activist who uses art and music and spectacle to create a political message that is usually quite strong and direct, and in this case, he was activating against mountaintop removal, which I'll ask you more about in a minute, and was arrested and charged with heavy charges, like facing a year in jail. And today he was actually the trial that began.
Well, it was yesterday.
Or yesterday, Monday, right?
And fortunately, the prosecutors backed off, and they reduced the charges to something that's really more acceptable for the type of theater that he does. But, you know, Billy does more than just theater. He kind of creates his own reality. Mm-hmm. And he really is a street preacher. He believes what he's saying, and people pick up on it. And I just think he's brilliant. You know, he really kind of treats the mental illness of our society. He's like our pastor.
The Church of Stop Shopping, right?
Yes, yes.
Of course.
I'm a big fan. So I came up here to support him at his trial, and a lot of people came up to support him, and he's been supported by people around the world. So that's what solidarity is all about. We try to help each other when we get in these situations.
So they knocked the charges down today, or yesterday at the hearing?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly. There were just some minor 24 hours of community service.
That's what they offered him.
Sentence, yeah.
Okay.
He hasn't taken it yet. They still will settle it later, but at least this part is behind us.
Mm-hmm. So what was he protesting about? What is
Chase Bank is funding the mountaintop removal operations. They're the biggest lender to the fossil fuel industry in general. Yeah. So Billy's been trying to get them to get their money out of mountaintop removal. It really brings into question the morality of mountaintop removal. If it's wrong to do, it's wrong to put your money in.
And so he was protesting inside the bank. He actually entered
in the lobby, and he's been doing this for quite a while. Right. And these banks are like fortresses. It's really hard to get up to the boardrooms and do the protest there. So really, several times a week, it seems like he will go into one of those lobbies and stage a protest, and then preach to people on the corner, and you know, the choir will be there, and hopefully become such a nuisance that, you know, and he's not the only one working on this divestment campaign. It's a national campaign. So other organizations are also doing it, and there's activity going on in other cities where they're present. So hopefully the combined pressure will force them to get out of mountaintop removal. But right now we haven't seen much movement on their side, so I'm sure he's going to keep the pressure up.
What does it mean to remove a mountaintop?
Well, you know, in the old days, mining was done by pick and shovel, and you could dig a hole into the side of the mountain. You know, it's not really underground mining the way we think of it. It's horizontal. And as the equipment got bigger and bigger, the mines got bigger and bigger, and some of these mines go back 12, 14 miles. I mean, they come out on the other side of the state almost. So this is traditionally how they've gotten coal. Now, those seams are getting depleted. There are other seams there, but they're too thin to work in. So the only way they know how to get it out is they start on the top of the mountain, they flatten it off, they drill holes, they put dynamite in, they pulverize the layer, they push it off the side, they take an 18-inch seam of coal, maybe a 2-foot seam of coal, and then they blast again. It's like a layer cake. Every so many feet there's going to be another layer of coal. This has hundreds of millions of year history of making these coal deposits, and they've been going through them only for about 100 years. But in spite of the claims that we have the Saudi Arabia of coal in Appalachia, most of the good coal has been mined out.
So now they have to get coal is harder to get, and this mountaintop removal is a way of getting...
It's cheaper. They don't have union labor. They shut down the underground mines. They put all the miners up on the strip jobs, as they call them, and much lower pay. It takes many fewer miners to get the same amount of coal. So it's really about cutting the bottom line for the companies, and they don't really care the mess that they're leaving behind.
Why should we care they're taking off the top of a mountain?
Well, I mean, if you look at a map of this country, Appalachia actually straddles most of the eastern part of the country. This is where all the water in our rivers comes from, and it's water for 2/3 of the population of this country. So that there is very important. When those storms come in from the sea, where they come up from the Gulf, this is where they put the water, and it comes out. So when these mountains are pulverized, when the soil is compacted, when those creeks are just turned into ditches, that water doesn't sink in. It comes out really fast all at once, so you get flooding. And that, but also we have many other problems like the sludge dams up there. One of them has 8 billion gallons of sludge behind it.
A sludge? What is sludge?
It is what's left over when they clean the coal, because when the coal comes out of the ground, it's not ready to burn. And what they have to do is they use a detergent, and coal actually floats. So all the shale and other rock will fall to the bottom, and then they rinse it off. The stuff that comes off, that's called sludge. It still contains coal, but it's been refined somewhat, and it also has all kinds of gooey chemicals that they use in the processing. So this is deposited behind an earthen dam, which is prone to earthquakes and also, increased severe weather that we're seeing because of climate change. So
like
these were not
Katrina.
designed to hold this stuff forever. And if it goes into the Canal River, it goes into the Ohio River. If it goes into the Ohio, it's going to go into the Mississippi.
Actually, it sounds like Hanford.
Yes, it's very much like Hanford. It's a ticking time bomb, and there's many of them. So they're still making this stuff, and they're blowing the dynamite off, really not very far from the dam, not very far from the house where I live in.
Do you hear it?
Oh, yes. It rattles the windows sometimes on the house. It's so close.
Wow.
But we hear it every day, except Sunday. They run 12-hour shifts, and they go around the clock.
Right. Now, how do people in West Virginia feel about this activity? Does it bring any economic benefit to the people there, so that you have like the same problem maybe with the timber forces in Northern California who've said, what, are you taking our jobs away?
Well, I mean, those miners would have been better off if they'd have stayed in the union and they'd have stayed underground. There used to be 20,000 miners in my county. Now there's a fraction of that. So you can't make a jobs argument. This is a jobs killing program. But what about the other people who work? I mean, even the people who work in the forest. There's a lot of timber cutting that goes on there. These are second growth forests. They're not old growth forests for the most part, but they've been a source of timber for local craftspeople and house builders, and for years has always been the timber. So this is gone. We've lost 2 million acres of forest to mountaintop removal in Appalachia. That's 2 Yellowstone parks, if you add it all together. That's a lot of timber that'll never grow back. They can't grow trees on this soil. So, there's just so many trade-offs that you can't really justify a single job or a single dollar. But the fact is, when they're gone, they'll roll up their tents and everybody will be broke anyway. So this is just a temporary fix. It's been going on since the mid-'70s. It may not continue for even another 10 years. We don't know, but this is certainly no future for West Virginia. The Walmart employs more people than the coal industry does. The health care industry employs more people than the coal industry does. There are a lot, and they're of course sending many of the patients to the hospital. So the state of West Virginia, the economy of West Virginia loses money on every ton of coal that leaves that state.
We're speaking with Mike Roselle, who is an activist in West Virginia fighting against mountaintop removal. He's a longtime environmental activist. He was here in New York to offer support for Reverend Billy, who fortunately dodged the bullet of possible year in jail for his activity protesting Chase Bank, which is involved in financing this mountaintop removal process we've just been discussing. Mike Roselle, could you tell me how people can learn more? You have a website and that kind of
our website is climategroundzero.org or .net.
One word, climategroundzero.
Yes.
.org or .net.
You can find out about our campaign, which is really focusing right now on trying to end the blasting. They can't do any mountaintop removal without the dynamite. We know from the studies that we've done over the last 2 or 3 years what this dust is doing. And it contains a lot of really dangerous chemicals, and it's the reason why we have the highest mortality rates in West Virginia, which already has the nation's highest mortality rates.
What can people do?
Well, we're trying to pass a bill called the Appalachian Community Health Emergency Act, the ACE Act, and you can also go to ACE.
How do you spell that?
ACHE. ACHE.
ACHE.
Appalachian Community Health Emergency, because what we found are clusters that are so high that we really do have a health emergency. And we've buried a few of our friends over the last few years, and we know what this dust does. And I see it on my refrigerator. It gets in the house even.
Caused by the blasting.
Yeah, and there are some particles that fall real close to where the blasting happens. Some of it drifts farther down the valley, and really the ones that you can't see are the ones that are the most dangerous. And we really don't know where they go when they leave the mountain, but we know that they do fall on people's gardens, and the USGS has told us that we shouldn't be eating the vegetables out of our gardens. So that's how bad.
Now that sounds like
that's how bad this stuff is. You can't even eat your tomatoes.
Okay.
So the bill would just end the blasting until the government could study the effects. And right now we've had non-governmental organizations do the study. They're peer-reviewed scientific studies, but they haven't been done by a single federal agency in charge of mining. So we want them to see this as a first step. Put a moratorium on it, do the study. Now, if you want to come back after that and say that you want to blow the mountain up, fine. Let's be honest about what you're doing.
Okay. Mike Roselle. By the way, we have a phone. We're live here in the studio. Our phone number is on the screen, 212-245-7273. We encourage viewers to call in and to join the conversation. You're invited to do so. There's the number. Just give a call, and remember to turn your television down when you get on the phone, because there's a little bit of a delay that's just natural to the process. So go ahead and call. All right, Mike Roselle, I want to step back and broaden it, and tell me a little bit about how you became an environmentalist. What prompted you? How old were you? What prompted you to move in the direction of being an lifelong environmental activist?
Well, I mean, it was a very gradual process. It started when I was growing up in Louisville, and there was a community center, a settlement house, we used to call them, that would take us out into the woods. And we had naturalists, and it was kind of a non-denominational Christian program, but there was a lot of emphasis on the land ethics. And so that I think that was very helpful, especially since I grew up in the inner city. And then later, when I moved to Wyoming in 1975, I started meeting actual environmentalists, and then I was recruited. I had done some organizing and protests on the Vietnam War before that, so I had some experience with people that you knew, like Dana Bill and A.J. Weberman and those yippies. So
Aaron Kay, who might be out there right now.
Aaron, I know
hopefully you're watching, yeah.
So I actually learned quite a bit. Tom Prasad, they were great teachers, because they really
the yippies,
they were outrageous.
Right?
There was just nothing that they wouldn't do. And so, being from the South, and we're taught not to be that outrageous, it was really nice to be encouraged to act out in that way. When I got to Wyoming, they were attempting to do some logging near Yellowstone Park, so I got involved in that issue. That was my first timber issue. We were successful in preventing Weyerhaeuser from logging a really interesting high-altitude basin near Yellowstone. So,
by the way, we're still at 9 Bleecker Street. The Yippie headquarters on Bleecker near Bowery is still alive, and they have a free open mic every Wednesday night where people just come and have a good time, play music, and folks are invited. It doesn't cost anything.
They'll come down.
Yeah, it's for everybody. You're invited. Okay, so interesting. So, what is the philosophy? How did you start developing this philosophy that led to Earth First? This whole activist philosophy.
Well, when we were working on wilderness issues in Wyoming, we had a difficult time getting the media interested. And there were times when people got very frustrated, and they would take matters into their own hands, and things would get destroyed, or maybe trees would get spiked. But for the most part, there was no describing that as political activity. It was just vandalism. The police and the timber companies usually like to sweep it under the rug, to keep it quiet. They didn't really want people to know that people were acting.
They catch on to the idea of putting spikes in trees in order to stop
So we thought they needed a little more vocal opposition, a little more I mean, there was such a oppressive political situation in Wyoming. We were dominated by the Republicans, and we couldn't do
Dick Cheney?
Yeah, Dick Cheney was our congressman. I testified in front of him many times back then during the wilderness days. He was a big, big enemy of wilderness in the state of Wyoming. Not surprising, and a big supporter of the energy companies. So that's where, working with the Sierra Club and Friends of the Earth and the Wyoming Outdoor Council and those type of groups, and we would, do our mailings and put our newsletters together, and every once in a while, we would have meetings, and mostly we would mobilize people to get involved in the process, the hearings and the appeals. And but that just wasn't getting us anywhere. So we started using direct action, especially when Getty Oil came into the Grovants. That was about 76 or so. And they wanted to drill really right next to Yellowstone National Park. So this was something that the locals were 90% opposed to. And yet they didn't know how to stop it. And so we organized a lot more vocal, a lot more militant opposition, and we were doing things right now that I wouldn't even talk about. But I mean, we would cut the geophones on the what we used to call the guys that do the seismographic exploration and all this expensive electronic equipment, tires. We would slash tires, and we were responsible for millions of dollars of damage. But we, at that point, didn't have a name. And we were keeping it all quiet, except we were in the Stagecoach bar. We would pound on the bar and brag about it, and everybody in the county knew we were doing it. But, times are different now.
Right, right.
But, eventually we realized that kind of stuff was just not going to win us the kind of support that we needed, and we toned it down a little bit, even in that campaign. But we did a lot of civil disobedience, and, ultimately we kept that well out of there. It was the first time that an environmental impact statement had been required for a land-based rig, and the first time that a lawsuit had been filed over a land-based rig, and the first time that we won the lawsuit. So today it's protected a wilderness area. It's part of the greater Yellowstone wilderness. The
area around it can't be, you can't have ugly, horrible, polluting oil wells pumping away.
It was a bit of a victory. Now the oil and gas industry has moved south of there to Pinedale, and what was really once a nice small town has been really, really totally.
Do they have fracking? Is how they do it there?
Yeah, they've always had fracking there, but they used to do just vertical fracking. Well, I worked on the fracking wells myself. I was a roughneck for 7 years while I was in Wyoming. That's what was one of my part-time jobs.
Well, you were working on the oil wells while you were protesting them.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, I thought we were going to need gas. I thought that
natural gas.
Yeah, and I thought that there were. We drilled for oil too, and I thought there were places where it was acceptable and places where it wasn't. Yeah. And I was just starting to learn about climate change, and I thought we had a lot more time. Everybody thought we had more time, and so it wasn't a matter of where would we not drill oil. Certainly, we were going to drill for oil, but there were places that we shouldn't drill for oil. That was basically our position. Now my position is there ain't no place you can drill for oil. But now they're doing the horizontal fracking there, and so that's just a whole different ballgame. It is fracking on steroids compared to the way we used to do it.
And in New York, that's what they want to do. Or they're fighting to do it, and they're doing it in Pennsylvania, not right now.
Well, most of the country has these.
And we've had programs here on the show where folks are protesting these high-pressure gas mains that they're building out in the Atlantic Ocean and bringing them under residential neighborhoods. And the biggest, because they're building the gas infrastructure, is being built up to take the gas from the fracking.
Boom. It's another boom.
Absolutely.
And it'll certainly be followed by a bust.
As they all are.
They all are.
Right. What happens with the bust? What happens then?
Well, I mean, we went through a bust in Wyoming in I think it was about 83. And that was when the cost of Middle Eastern oil went down so low that they couldn't really compete economically. So it had nothing to do with environmental regulations or demand for that matter. So, I don't know, I guess there were 500 rigs around Pinedale when I was working there. And the last time, I think it was a few years later, there was maybe 5.
Now, as you were more and more involved in this activity, Earth First became targeted. I mean, they became a target of the government. And
well,
the FBI.
I think we made ourselves a target.
And how
we
did
knew that was coming. But Earth First was definitely infiltrated by the FBI on numerous occasions. There was provocateurs, there was snitches, there was even undercover agents. So we got the whole the whole treatment, and it had a big effect on the cohesiveness of the organization, and a lot of things happened after that, caused us to be more scattered and more divisive amongst ourselves. So that it's not just the direct oppression, but all these things that happen afterwards. All the recrimination and paranoia, and so yeah, it did have an effect.
And folks went to jail. Some folks went to jail.
Yeah. There were. It depends on which cases you're talking about, but there really was only one case where anyone was ever convicted of monkey wrenching, and that was in what we call the Arizona 5 case, the power lines.
The power lines. How did that was an interesting case. I remember that. How did that play out in the end?
Well, they basically pled guilty, and they got sentences that were far reduced from the original charges had they filed them that way. I think Mark Davis wound up doing 4 years. Peg Millett did 2 or 3 years. I can't remember the exact date.
And was that
Foreman did 1 night?
Was the government involved in that? I mean, was there provocateurs involved?
Yeah. There was the typical way that they do it. I mean, first they send in a guy that looks exciting, and he wants to do some crazy stuff, and he knows a lot of stuff and a lot of people, and then he knows
skills,
somebody
maybe
else, and that guy comes in, and he's the agent, and he's the handler, and then he came to my house, the snitch, and I made dinner for him. I thought he was an interesting enough fella, and he had a wire on him at the time, but I wasn't taking the bait. I get people telling me crazy stuff all the time. I just can't respond to all of it. But some people get caught up in that. Here's somebody that wants to be even more radical than Earth First. These Earth First guys are wimps. This is the way to go. And then people get caught up in that, and then usually later after they get caught, they realize that maybe that wasn't the best.
You've lost track of how many times you've been arrested, right?
Yeah, I don't count them anymore.
It was over 50.
Yeah, it's been at least that.
Did you ever have to actually do time?
Well, I mean, not real time. I did 4 months in South Dakota. That was probably the longest. Well, that was the longest stretch I'd done. Usually it's a week.
What about yippies in this? All the yippies seem to have this charmed life when it comes to these busts. They rack up 50, 60, 100 busts and no time in jail until Dana Beal actually broke the record.
Yeah, well, most of our offenses were relatively minor. Disturbing the peace, disorderly conduct, trespass, obstruction. There were times when we were charged with felonies, but most cases, like with Billy's, by the time we came to trial, they were reduced to something that we could accept.
Last 5 minutes, discuss where things are heading. How do you feel after all these years of work, decades of work, putting into this with global warming now looming sooner than ever, and the rejection of any responsibility by the big powers to their responsibility, their role in creating this? So, do you have hope at all?
Well, I mean, you have to maintain hope. Even on the Titanic, there's hope. But, we've passed so many tipping points that we've been talking about since 1975, and we just keep missing every opportunity to really get, our hands on this problem. So, it would be a mistake to say that we're making progress. We're not. And I don't have the answer to that. I mean, we're just trying to protect one area of our country. I think other people are trying to do the same, up in Athabasca, up in...
What's the problem? What's behind all of this? What's forcing it? Is it a cabal of people in the government? Is it an attitude of corporate...
Well, it's both, isn't it? It's both the apathy of the people who could seize the power just by taking the ballot box. All right? And then it's the greed of the corporations that don't want that process to happen, so they dump crap all over the debate and to control the media. So the public is uninformed, but they're lazy. They don't care. They like to be uninformed. They like to hear things that make them feel good, and they don't like to hear things from us because it makes them feel bad. So until we can break out of that, I don't know how we're going to solve the problem, but I know what we need to keep doing, and that's what we always have been doing, is try to address this problem, try to tackle it, try to, have campaigns that actually, reduce carbon emissions, would actually stop fossil fuel extraction. We know how to do this. We've been doing this for 20 years. Now, do we know how to get the rest of the country with us? I don't know. I wish we did know. But I think the message is starting to resonate, and I think the voices now are starting to include the poor nations of the world who are most directly affected by this, and they're shaming this country and all the rich countries. So the dynamics are shifting, and everything is changing. But this is really kind of a dangerous change, and no one can really say where this is going. Anyone that try to tell you that that this can be solved by putting in some more solar collectors and lowering the speed limit, It's just not.
It's at a leverage level. We're talking about a revolution.
Yeah, we're going to be facing some very serious challenges, and every storm, of course, is a challenge in the aftermath.
Yeah.
It's a challenge.
Like
for those
Sandy,
people.
we all experienced here in New York.
Home.
Shocking to people here in New York that we would have
so
something
more and
like
more
that.
people are going to experience the effects of climate change in such a way that they will never forget it, and maybe that will provide the tipping point in public perception. But right now, the public seems afraid of the truth.
Last couple of minutes. What about the young generation of activists and environmentalists? Do you think they're on the right track? And do you work with any of the
I
groups
don't think they're on the right track at all.
Why
I don't
not?
know what they learn in those environmental studies programs, but they don't learn how to actually do organizing. And I find them often spinning their wheels, and it's not a large youth movement like there was in the 60s. Let's face it. And where's the music? Where's the gatherings? Where's the community, the sense of belonging to something bigger than yourself? You just don't seem to see that in the climate movement. People go to meetings, people go to rallies, but we don't seem to have that kind of spirit. And we need that. And I don't know, I try to play a few songs on the guitar just to do my part, but it's got to be more of a cultural thing. And when people reject modern industrial culture and they want to seek something else, they've got to have another community to come into, and because they're leaving one behind. And so the people that you used to have as friends are not going to talk to you anymore if you're an activist. So we need that kind of community for people to have something to belong to and something that we can support each other in the work that we do.
Okay, 1 minute to go. Can you tell folks how they can learn more about these
get on the
issues?
website, climategroundzero.org, one word. Or just type in my name, Mike Roselle, in Google. It'll surprise you, but you'll find it.
All right, great, Mike Roselle. And last 45 seconds, anything you'd like to leave us with? Any message for folks here in New York about the environment and what they should do?
Well, if you got any money, send us a check.
Okay, and it will go to a good cause, right?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, good. And how about activists? What should they be doing right now?
Well, it's just time to dig in, and I don't have any advice. It's that we need to keep what we're doing. We need to do more of it. We need to be more creative, but mostly we need to be bolder. We cannot be afraid to upset the apple cart. Now is not a time for manners, and I would just encourage people to look at what the Yippies did, to look at what Earth First did, and we were able to change the political dynamics with a very small group of people.
Thank you very much.
We're out of time.